Happy 4th of July, guys. Actually, this video is totally not coming out on the 4th of July. So a couple days ago, I made a video called Video Game Music Is Real Music, Just Worse. And as expected, I got a lot of hate and a lot of criticism. Some criticism I actually really appreciated, and some people were really nice, and I really appreciate you guys. And some people were just really mad. So you may be wondering, why am I making a part 2 to my most hated video ever, when this is literally the like to dislike ratio? Well, the main reason is that, and I swear, someone made a 2100 word argumentative essay against what I said. And I really appreciate it. Like, it's very flattering. In this video, I'm going to be reading it, and I have a response to every single thing he says, and he did do a really good job, so I have a lot of respect for him. Before I get into it, I want to clarify 2 things that I don't think was clear enough on my last video. Firstly, if you haven't seen it, you should go see it so you can hate me even more when you watch this video. But a lot of you guys thought that I didn't know what the difference was between music and songs. But I do. The reason I was comparing songs to video game music was because Wyvern made the comparison, and I showed that at the beginning of my video, so I'm sorry if that wasn't clear enough, that's my fault. Secondly, a lot of you guys were talking about instrumentals and where that was. I didn't talk about instrumentals because it was mainly just between songs and video game soundtracks, but I will say I respect a lot of instrumentals more than video game soundtracks, and the reason for this is because I've seen a lot more innovation in certain instrumentals than any video game soundtrack I've heard, and there's definitely more I could talk about, but I'm going to go in further detail whenever I read this guy's giant essay. So yeah, now that that's quickly covered, let's go into the 2100 word argumentative essay against my video, Video Game Music Is Real Music, Just Worse. Okay, so the way this is going to work is I'm going to read out this guy's essay, and then after I read one of his paragraphs, I'll just respond to it, and it's probably going to be a while. By the way, his name is Noobmaster62.
Thor, he's back. That kid on the TV just called me a dickhead again.
Noobmaster.
And if you'd like to see his original comment, it's one of the top comments on the original video. Okay, so I wrote a 2100 word text debunking everything you said, so it's going to be divided into multiple parts. I disagree a lot with your view, but I believe it's just because you don't have any music education and don't really know what you're talking about. So I'm going to go over every point and explain why you're wrong. But please try going into this wanting to change your opinion, try to see things differently. Also, since this is the internet and it's by text, you can't get emotion of speech through it, so I must precise I'm doing this by compassion, so don't read this text as something hateful or with a superior tone. I'm truly passionate about the subject and just want to share my passion. Hope you'll try to give video game music a chance and see it as a medium that deserves respect. All I have to say for his intro is that I do think that video game music does deserve respect. My argument in the video wasn't for video game music not to deserve respect, just that there's more reason for me to respect songs and other instrumentals, which is precisely what I meant when I said other music in my video. We'll start with the first point. Video game music can't tell a story. You're going over this point really quickly in the video, but it seems the general idea is discussed more in depth in your third part about meaning. So there are some things I'm going to answer here and others later in the comment. Might also repeat myself at some point later on. So your main point about this is that because it's used for a certain context, someone who never played the game couldn't at least get an idea of what the music is trying to say. By saying that modern music can tell a story, I guess you're talking about lyrics, but there's a difference between music and lyrics. While music is the instruments, the voice, etc., the lyrics are closer to poetry, and I will go back on why lyrics don't matter in the third part of this comment. But without storytelling, music can still share emotions and ideas of what is happening. I'm going to take for example the song Sealed Vessel by Christopher Larkin for the Hollow Knight soundtrack. It's quiet, but then the strings come in and start building tension, letting a more normal boss fight theme take place. It's a dynamic orchestral piece that keeps this idea of tense situation through its composition, whether it's through functional harmony, counterpoints, or the technique used on certain instruments. The song then proceeds to change completely. Now it's just a string assemble playing a tense melody. We get a progression of tension. The violins go higher and higher. Choirs start joining. Something tragic is happening. We get to the climax where now the full orchestra comes back, putting an end to this moment of horror that you can clearly feel through music. Then comes the calm after the storm, a piano playing a hopeful melody, but still without a touch of sadness, nostalgia maybe, concluding this story. While there were no lyrics, you can still grasp the idea behind this song. It starts preparing us for something big, the big thing happens, it's a tense moment, then it suddenly becomes tragic, and then it concludes on a peaceful, sad note. And you don't need to know anything about music to understand that. I know because I showed it to over 20 people and they could all get the concept without any explanation. But that's just a general idea without going deeper and into all the music theory details in the composition that show even more how well thought this piece is. I'd recommend you check out Davey Vask's channel. He's a game composer who reacts to video game music he's never heard before. He manages to guess everything about the story just by listening to the soundtrack without ever playing the game. You should watch this video on Sealed Vessel. He talks about points I just explained but also goes deeper. Also, when he talks about music theory, he makes it super simple so that everyone can understand what he's talking about. Keep in mind also that he doesn't see the game footage on screen in his videos. He goes into it completely blind. I never say in my video that video game music can't at least give an idea of what it's trying to say. All I actually said was that it can't tell a story like lyrical music can. I think it can give you an idea of what is happening with emotions changing, but it can't really tell a story. And you actually even admit this in your comments, so I personally think my position was probably a little bit misrepresented, but it's okay. I'd also like to clarify that I actually do understand the difference between music and songs, but I'm comparing video game music or soundtracks to songs because of Wyvern comparing them, and I showed this at the beginning of my video. There's also a way smaller chance that I would have brought up storytelling as a measure for what makes good music if so many people, including Wyvern, claim that soundtracks can tell as good of a story or a story at all compared to songs when I believe that they cannot. Now, before addressing your second point, I'm going to go back to a topic I feel you didn't do justice to. When defining what makes a good song, you said an emotional reaction of some sort is needed. Well, you can get different emotions in video game music. Listen to Mice on Venus by C418 for the Minecraft soundtrack, and tell me you didn't feel any profound emotion. Listen to The Only Thing They Fear Is You by Mick Gordon for the Doom soundtrack, and try not to headbang. Without context, you can still feel something from the video game music because at the end of the day, it's music at the same level as any other genre. I agree. I never claimed that video game music couldn't have this. Okay, time for the second point, how they use the instruments. Now that's where it seems you start getting confused and don't really know what you're talking about. First, the point of the computer not being a tool for making music is out of the debate because you seem to realize in your pinned comment your mistake. But you dug yourself into an even bigger hole with this pinned comment, so I'm going to go over every point. For the first argument that since it's made using programs, it doesn't deserve as much respect as modern music, you just invalidated a huge part of today's music. Not even going to talk about electro music because you would have a heart attack, lol. Even big artists don't bother using real instruments anymore. If anything, video game music and film music are single-handedly keeping orchestras alive because most of them use real instruments now. We'll go back to this later, by the way. But I wanted to talk about the point that it cannot be replayed or performed live. Excuse me, what? I seriously do not know what you're trying to say. Brawlman64 wrote a comment against you saying that even music that doesn't use real instruments is performed live, and you seem to not understand, so I'm going to go over it again. While some OSTs like Undertale or old Final Fantasy games use chiptunes and sound fonts, they were played live a lot. Undertale had a 5th anniversary orchestra live, and Final Fantasy has Distant World, which you should look into. Would recommend One Winged Angel from Final Fantasy VII, the Distant World version. For the second point that it feels roboty, I don't know what you're talking about here. If you're talking about the chiptune like for old games, then that's just historical context. I'm going to go back over this topic in a bit, but if you're talking about actual VSTs not sounding like real instruments, you're nitpicky because there's no way a person with so little music knowledge would be able to tell the difference. Now back to chiptune sound. This sound was either due to the limits of technology at the time, or nowadays is a stylistic choice that should be respected. Because in the end, music isn't about the instruments but the talent, and this musical talent isn't just reserved to playing an instrument, but also music writing and composition. And in terms of writing, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name, is leagues above, let's say, Bob Marley. It's not even comparable. I mean, just listen to Dancing Mad from Final Fantasy VI. It's a piece of music that's at the same level as classical composers like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, etc. There's so much more than instrument playing in music. Now for the third point, it lacks collaboration. I don't even know what to say. Enough people have talked about it in the comments, so I don't feel like it's something worth going deep into, if not to say that classical music lacks collaboration too. And many solo artists write their stuff alone. Even in bands, it can just be one person writing everything. Look at the band Boston. Something I also saw you talking about in the comments is that you can't compare video game composers with classical composers, because classical composers made their songs with real instruments. Well, no. Classical composers made their songs with paper and a piano most of the time, so by your logic, we should respect video game composers more than classical, because at least video game composers use more real instruments during the writing, yet this reasoning is simply wrong and proves your whole argument doesn't work. And if you meant that classical music is played by real instruments, well, so can video game music with the live example I gave earlier. I talked enough about fake instruments, so now let's talk about real ones, which should make your respect for the genre. I won't go over the composition again because I already talked about that, so I'm just going to recommend you some video game music with real instruments and awesome compositions. Ascension from Final Fantasy XVI, and also Away, Ifrit vs. Phoenix from the same game, both composed by, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. These are epic orchestral works. Now for something different, Ludwig the Holy Blade by Yuka Kitamura for Bloodborne. This song with an epic boss theme also presents a story, but I'm not going to go into details because I still have to cover your third and last argument, and I'm getting tired of writing. But you should check out Marco Meatball series, where he shows video game music to people who have never heard anything from the genre, but are classical musicians, like opera singer, classical composers, opera conductors, etc. Even the people who don't respect the genre recognize how good and well made the song is. But the entire series as a whole is really interesting to watch, to see different opinions and POVs. Just to clarify to everyone, I changed my pinned comment not because I thought it was wrong, but I wanted to tell everyone I was making this video so I could clarify what I meant in that pinned comment more in this video. You talk about me invalidating today's music because it's also computer generated. In fact, a lot of people bring this up. It's surprising to me personally that no one could conclude that I also value that music less than music that uses real instruments. My point was that video game music as a medium does this a lot, and when comparing it to music with real instruments, I respect real instruments more. This is also why I respect Mario Galaxy's soundtrack miles ahead than Undertale's soundtrack. I also still do not believe a computer is an instrument because it's not the sole purpose of a computer. People brought up the argument that softwares could be considered an instrument because that is their sole purpose if their sole purpose is to make music. But I still reject this because instruments are commonly defined as objects, which is one of the reasons a computer argument could have worked. I reject softwares as instruments not to automatically say that they are worse without further reasoning, but to say that I do have the right to reject softwares as instruments. I'll go as far to say, for the sake of the argument, that they are digital instruments. For it being able to be performed live, I don't think it's understood what I was trying to say. Computer-generated music cannot be played live as computer-generated music, and that's just a fact. Your argument is that it can be played live with real instruments, but you've fallen into a trap because that only makes me respect real instruments even more, further strengthening my belief. The Roboti thing is more of just my personal preference, but here's a post I found on Reddit that can explain what I mean. The collaboration thing I talk about is more of for computer-generated music to be compared to orchestras because I respect orchestras more. And one of the main reasons for that is that I think that multiple people coming together with different talents making music is far more beautiful. It does have nothing to do with when I'm actively listening to the music, sure, but it's still something I believe does fit in with the definition of respect. For what you said about Bob Marley, I'm just going to say why I respect him more than any video game soundtrack I've ever heard. And this is something that I got from my dad, so yeah. Bob Marley will forever represent an entire generation from a specific point in history. I can listen to it in 50 years and still feel exactly what people were going through. Video game music doesn't speak to anything that transcends time like that. The score for Elden Ring will always just be the score for Elden Ring. Not saying it's not good, just that's all it is. So there's a short little paragraph on why I respect Bob Marley more than video game music, so hopefully that makes sense. Next, I don't know where I ever said that classical composers made their songs with real instruments. But if I did, what I should have said is that classical composers performed their music with real instruments, but created them in a somewhat similar way to computer-generated music. I would say I simply respect the execution of the music more with real instruments, but not the way the music was created. Now for the third and last argument, which is about meaning in songs, you talk about ghosts that we knew, and say that no video game music can ever tell a story like that. Well, to that, I will give you one example out of many, Sealed Vessel. Now you're gonna say that even with what I talked about at the start, if you didn't play the game, you can just get a general idea of the story, but not the full story of the Hollow Knight and how tragic his life is. But that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. Lyrics don't matter. They're the same as needing to play the game fully to get a soundtrack, because if you listen to the song for the first time, your focus isn't going to be on understanding the lyrics. To actually fully understand what a song's about, you need to do some research, or someone tell you about it. It's exactly the same as video game music, but even less accessible because in order to understand lyrics, you need to speak the language. Music doesn't have this problem, hence music and lyrics being something different and separate. And when you talk about the part of the song where he sings "Promise will be alright" and does it happily, the reason it's happy is clearly not because of the lyrics, but because of the composition. The song is in the key of C major. And to make it simple, major keys are happy, but here most of the melodies are sung in a relative key minor of the key which is A minor, a minor key that sounds sad. But when he says the line one last time, he finally sings in the right key, which is C major, and hence sounds happy. So basically, there's no difference between modern music and video game music. Both are accessible and relatable to everyone, and share a story and a meaning. It seemed like you only considered songs with lyrics to be real music, which would mean that you don't have respect for instrumentals either. But that would dismiss genres like electro, jazz, a bunch of different people. By the way, talking about jazz and electro, there's a lot of footage in your video from Dave the Diver, which has a soundtrack that takes influence from both genres, so by saying you don't respect the soundtrack, you're not respecting the genres either. And here's the thing, video game music isn't a genre, it's a medium, and that's what makes the beauty of it. When you say video game music didn't revolutionize anything, you're wrong, because it's the only medium where music knows no boundaries. In the same soundtrack you can get djent, followed by barricade, then jazz, then electro, to some trap maybe. There are no genre barriers, which gives the artist complete freedom, compared to other bands/artists who often need to stay in a genre, otherwise they get crapped on. Not saying modern musicians don't break barriers either. Daft Punk did it in Random Access Memories, and so did Avenged Sevenfold in their latest album, Life is But a Dream, and Mr. Bungle completely don't give an F about the rules, lol. But it's not something really common, which makes video game music special. Thanks for reading, and I hope your views have changed even just a bit. Sealed Vessel does not tell a story like that. It's mere fiction, whereas ghosts that we knew can be real life events. Things that actually matter because it's about real life and are more personal. I never found lyrics hard to understand, and I think it takes much less work to listen and find out what the story of the lyrics are saying, rather than playing through an entire game. I get your point with how Mumford is singing the song, but he's combining that storytelling aspect with the composition, whereas video game music just uses that composition. Again, it's worth remembering there's a really small chance I would have ever brought this comparison up if it wasn't brought up in the first place. When you talk about how video game music as a medium has the most freedom, I would just say that so does movie music, and movies came first, so it's not revolutionary. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I could totally be wrong. Maybe I am wrong, I don't know. But that is exactly where my line of thinking went as soon as you said that, so yeah. Again, when it comes to instrumentals, it really just depends on what the instrumental is. A lot of the time I respect it as much as lyrical songs because they could be really innovative or really unique. Whereas I've never really got that feeling with video game music. It's always just felt like movie music or a score, and it's never really given me that same feeling. Also, I want to correct one thing you said in here. You said it seemed like you only considered songs with lyrics to be real music. That's actually not true. I never considered video game music or instrumentals to not be real music. I think they're real music. When I said other music, I was including instrumentals. That's why I couldn't just say songs, because I respect a lot of instrumentals and songs more than video game music. I still think they're all music, and this is all my personal preference. I'm just articulating why I respect what I do more than other things, and yeah. I appreciate your essay, but I have overall kept my same position. Not because what you wrote is bad, you seem like a really smart person. I think I've just had too much time to think about all of this, and to change my opinions that quickly, I don't think that would be really likely. But I do really appreciate it. Thank you though.